Hey friends, so in this video I just wanted to offer a really quick correction to just one really small thing that I said in the video on Matthew 3 verses 1 through 12. That as I was recording that video and I was talking about the quotation of Isaiah 40 verse 3 in Matthew chapter 3 verse 3, I said something like that when I was talking about the difference between that in Isaiah the meaning seems to be a voice crying out, pause, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, as opposed to in Matthew the meaning seems to be a voice crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. I said something like you could see that difference in Greek. And almost as soon as I finished that video, I went back and started thinking about that and realized, well, that's actually kind of a half truth that could be a little bit misleading. So this may not make a huge difference in your preaching or teaching, but it's just something that I had to clear up. I couldn't live with having misinformation in that video. Plus, it gives me a chance to talk about manuscripts, which I'm always very excited about, and to talk about Greek, which I'm always very excited about. So I'm going to try and do this just really quickly and explain what was maybe misleading about that statement. So I've put right here a picture of the of what a modern printed Greek New Testament looks like. And this part that I've circled is the quotation from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. And I'm assuming that most of you can't read Greek. If you can, awesome, that's great, and you can see this for yourself. But so I've put over here in this little box, I've tried to put this exactly parallel so that you can see uh, like what's going on here. And so what's most important is this first line right here that says, a voice calling out in the wilderness. And if you can't read that in Greek, that's what I have right here, a voice calling out in the wilderness. And then you see, then on the next line, this printed text has prepare the way of the Lord. Prepare the way of the Lord. Okay? And so when I said you could actually see this in the Greek, this this text right here is what I had in mind, because the modern printed Greek New Testament actually does, put this in such a way that you're separating the two lines, right? That it is in Matthew, in this printed Greek text, it is a voice calling in the wilderness. In other words, like we talked about in the other video, the voice is in the wilderness, right? The printed Greek text has put voice and in the wilderness on the same line, so that it's clear that's what is, at least what the people who printed this text are interpreting Matthew to be saying, is that the voice is in the wilderness, right? Whereas we talked about in the context of Isaiah, you would more naturally read this as simply a voice crying out, and what they're crying out is, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, right? And so this printed text makes that separation for you in the way that it's printed on the text, and so it's sort of helping you interpret the passage that way, right? That in Isaiah, this all just reads as a single line in the printed Septuagint, in the printed Greek translation of a modern printed Greek translation of the Old Testament. This all just reads in one line, so theoretically you could make the break anywhere, right? But the Nestle Aland modern Greek New Testament is making the break for you in the way that they put the Greek on the page, so that you are inclined to see it as a voice calling in the wilderness, and the voice in the wilderness is calling out, prepare the way of the Lord, as opposed to what we would read in Isaiah, a voice crying out, prepare the way of the Lord in the wilderness. But that's just a matter of where you sort of break up the words. So that's what I had in mind when I said that you could see this in Greek. But of course, here's the catch, and this is why it's only sort of a half truth, or you could even say flat out wrong in some ways, um, is because uh, this is not what, this right here is not what ancient manuscripts looked like. And I have instead a picture of that down here, right? So this, if you were actually reading ancient Greek, like this is what it would look like. So this is a picture of a manuscript known as Codex Sinaiticus. It's often referred to as the world's oldest Bible. You can actually, if you just Google Codex Sinaiticus, you'll find a website dedicated specifically to this manuscript, and you can see this manuscript for yourself. You don't have to just rely on my video. So if that's something that you think is cool and interesting like I do, you can go check out Codex Sinaiticus and look for that on the internet. Anyway, I've just grabbed a screenshot here from that website of the particular page from the Gospel of Matthew that we have this quotation on. And of course, the main thing I want you to notice here is that there are no spaces between words, right? Over here in this picture, I've done a close up of this section of the manuscript right here because this and this are this. This is a close up of the actual quotation. So again, I'm assuming most of you can't read Greek, but right here is the phone that we see right here. That's the word voice. Baontas, crying out in the wilderness. Anyway, I don't need to translate all that for you. You get the idea. The point is that there's not even spaces between words in most ancient manuscripts. This is the norm for most ancient manuscripts. You don't even get spaces between words, much less any kind of like punctuation or separating of lines like you get in the printed text. So the point is that when I said you could actually see that difference in the Greek text, I was thinking of this, but in reality, in the ancient manuscripts, you wouldn't actually be able to see it. It's just it's a question of where do you pause, right? Where do you break up the sentence? Now, all that to say that I still think that interpretation is correct. That I think Matthew, everything I said in the other video, I think is correct in the sense that I do think Matthew, and he's really copying Mark, are using this quotation in a different way. So I think that interpretation I offered in that video still stands, but I just had to make this one little correction. You will notice that just a kind of little fun thing here in Codex Sinaiticus is that even though there are no spaces between words, no other kind of punctuation or anything like that, it does have these marks here on the side which seem to be setting this apart as an Old Testament quotation. And you can actually see this in a couple other places on the page of this manuscript. So that's just a little thing that I thought was cool. So every once in a while you will find little marks that will help help you sort of navigate the manuscript in certain ways, but it is the norm of ancient manuscripts. And yeah, it's totally the norm across all ancient manuscripts that there is no spacing between words. That's one of the things you have to figure out as you read. And in fact, even in some later manuscripts, you can see where they'll put some little marks in for like manuscripts that were used in church reading. They'll put little marks in to help people figure out like where to break up a word or where to break up a sentence or things like that. So you have kind of the beginnings of a kind of punctuation, but punctuation is not the norm in ancient manuscripts. Okay, want to keep this video short, so I'm going to stop there, but had to just offer that quick addendum to that previous video. And of course, if you have any questions, you can leave questions in the comments or in the Canvas course that I'm creating this for, and I'm happy to provide more explanation if this didn't make any sense.